There's a lot of buildings that look really bad on the stage one report that aren't actually in a bad situation. So that's the first thing I would say is it might confirm there's not a problem. So that's good news. Secondly, it might not be that additional dollars just for resilience need to be spent. It could be that maybe the PCA identifies a new roof is needed, then you're just going to spend those roof replacement dollars more wisely, right? So it helps inform the spending so that you're not wasting money. So I hope to try and change some minds out there of like, oh, it's all going to be just extra resilience investment. It's really just about how are you maintaining those buildings and are you making good decisions?
Today, I'm excited to have Holly Neighbor, Chief Resilience Officer at AEI Consultants. She has been with AEI since 1999 and currently guides the firm's culture and organizational sustainability. Recently, Holly served as chair of the Property Resilience Assessment Task Group within ASTM International, and previously served as the 2019 president of the Crew Network, where she represented Crew on the Real Estate Roundtable board. She currently serves on the Commercial Real Estate Finance Council, CREFC, Property Risk and Resilience Steering Committee, and is an active member of ULI and the Environmental Bankers Association. Thanks for joining us today, Holly.
Thanks, Jessica. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to jump right in and talk about your recent experience in developing the property resilience assessment. You give a little bit of a background of the drivers for this project and what that really is.
Yeah, sure. So the ASTM Property Resilience Assessment, or PRA, emerged from a collaboration of over 180 industry experts, including REITs, lenders, developers, climate risk modeling companies, engineers, architects, hazard mitigation experts, and consultants who all came together to establish this ASTM standard guide. And this really came from an organic effort. We were observing such a wide variation in climate risk assessment products, and we recognized that this really calls for an ASTM standard. For your listeners, probably they're familiar with the Phase 1 environmental site assessment and the property condition assessment. They're both so ubiquitous in commercial real estate due diligence. So, our vision was to outline the best practices of physical risk assessments that were occurring out there so that the CRE community could reference a consensus based description of those best practices. ASTM standards are developed in a consensus based process, which is kind of wonky, but that's how the standards are built. It requires a series of ballots. It requires, everyone has an opportunity to vote. And that's why standards like the Phase 1 ESA can be referenced by federal agencies and why they become widely integrated into underwriting and risk management. So ASTM is a great home for this to live. But I really want to emphasize the point that this process that's outlined in the standard is a common sense approach that is built off of what sophisticated investors, including many NAREIT member firms, are already doing and have been doing. And that's how we built it. So it wasn't built in an idealized vacuum, but was developed by the task group based on the best in class approaches that were already going on. So I loved attending NAREIT's June 17th webinar on building resilience. And we heard exactly the ASTM process from one of the REIT folks that was on the panel about their approach of reviewing the portfolio risk, identifying what hazards might exist in the portfolio, identifying the sites that were driving the most risk in the portfolio, and then doing site-specific assessments to determine if vulnerability actually exists at those properties, and if so, to estimate potential damages and downtime, and then make improvements to the sites if needed. These improvements have benefits to the asset value in terms of avoided damages and downtime, better occupant experience and safety, as well as potential benefits to insurance renewals. And all of that helps the net operating income and therefore the value. And as you were saying, everything comes back to the math problem. What's the property worth? What are the potential hazards, the risks? What are the costs associated with those? And what's the ROI for making improvements? So again, just to get back to the source of the ASTM guide, it was never meant to be something extra or something brand new, but really a roadmap consistent with what firms were already doing to provide an industry accepted standard so we can all refer back to it. So all the parties agree on a common approach to communicating the findings. So, just briefly, I'll explain what it consists of. The first stage, it's 3 stages in all. The first stage is identifying the potential hazards using the commercially available modeling and mapping tools that most of your listeners are probably already obtaining, as well as checking local and regional sources. If City of Boston has a sea level rise map, we should make sure and check that along with the commercial model that you might have purchased. In this stage, this is strictly desktop, and I think it's already occurring in a majority of investment firms. The current potential hazard levels, as well as future scenarios of how they will change over time, are reviewed. Critically, the standard also outlines minimum disclosures by the climate modeling companies in this stage. And this was written by the industry for the industry. So we had a lot of those climate risk modeling companies in the task group. They helped write the required disclosures. And that's really a huge asset as we move forward in what some call, the Wild West of climate modeling. So stage one of the PRA is all that modeling stuff that people are already doing. In stage two, this is where a detailed on site vulnerability assessment is conducted by an engineer or architect. It often occurs alongside a property condition assessment. In fact, the task group decided to intentionally make the qualifications of the engineer or architect the same as the PCA. And I think a lot of the PCA firms out there have upskilled their staff or have augmented their PCA teams with hazard experts to be able to offer this. So in that stage, they're taking the information from stage one, walking the sites to confirm or refute what that modeling information projects. And in this stage, we create a rough order of magnitude estimate of the damage and downtime at the property. And of course, identifying any safety concerns. So this all helps with that math problem where we're talking about earlier. Also important to note that if stage one identifies elevated hazards, and then stage two, we get out there, we identify, hey, this property is actually really resilient already. The developer built this with these hazards in mind. That's the end of the story. There's no need to go on to act three. But in the third act or stage here, we develop the specific resilience recommendations to address any concerns that were identified, if necessary. So, by assuming the owner wants to consider possible hazard mitigation, rough order of magnitude costs for implementation of the resilience measures are provided so that a benefit cost analysis can be performed. And I should note that advanced design of actual resilience measures is not included in the PRA. It's strictly conceptual at this stage. It's just to help inform whether that design work needs to happen. And I think it's also important to make a couple other clarifications. The PRA is not a resilience certification, like a LEED certification or a green building certification. I know you talk a lot about that on the pod. It is a process of assessment, the same way a phase one and a PCA are. It's not a certification. However, that being said, certifications do feed into the results. So I know you had on a prior episode, Dan Kaniewski talk about the fortified certification. If a building had a fortified roof, it would definitely improve its results on the PRA. So all these things can work together. And then lastly, I would just say there are 3 different depths of assessment of the PRA. There's one that's more of a superficial level. It has less modeling. It's very similar to like a PCA where you could have a generalist perform your PCA, or you could have a generalist with a team of, property specialists on HVAC, elevators, roof, and so on. So the depth of assessment depends on the purpose of the assessment, what you're going to use the findings for, and how many specialists you want involved. So that's the overview of how we created it and what it consists of.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think I remember when somebody mentioned to me, like, hey, have you been following this project? And I hadn't, and we connected and I heard about it. And I was like, this is so awesome because I know in my own experience and so many of the sustainability leaders within the real estate community have all been kind of going through this process, as you said, on their own, kind of making it up as you go, like saying, getting pushback on the data and saying, well, this is the next step and we need to dig in further. And we don't know until we look at the property. And I think that's where we've come so far in understanding the potential hazards that are out there and how those are increasing and becoming more severe, and the climate is changing in certain areas to make different hazards, more vulnerability and things like that. But the connection to the building and the building owner and understanding, so what does this mean for me? I think that has really been a challenge, and I think that we've really come a long way, as I said, but the standardization of that process, I think, really helps with such a large, kind of disseminated industry where buying and selling buildings and the transactions are happening with different levels of sophistication on either side. The ability to have something to say, this is a standard process that we want to follow as part of our transaction, is huge. So how long since it's been a few months now since the standard came out?
Yeah, it was published in November of 24.
Okay. So we're a few months, half a year, almost coming up on a year. How do you see things going as far as using the approach being adopted in the market? And are you seeing that it's improving that transaction process and more projects being identified?
Yeah, I think it's really been remarkable to see how much it's being picked up across the industry. I think the reason for that really is because it was already being done in so many cases. And then for those who weren't already doing it, they're able to pick it up and run with it and say, okay, this is the best in class. This is the state of the industry. We can adapt this. I think, initially, when people are first exposed to the topic of getting climate risk, physical risk reports, some of them are like, "Oh, no, another due diligence report, another thing we have to order, another risk we have to factor in." But I'm actually seeing more of a kind of a gold rush of climate risk data being used for competitive advantage, right? So we're seeing this information being used in negotiations. A buyer might say, "Hey, we love this property, but based on our PRA, we're going to need to invest $1 million in flood prevention upgrades. So we're going to have to factor that into the purchase price, and it's becoming really a powerful tool for risk assessment and price negotiation. I think within the portfolio context, people are also using this information and have been for many years to make acquisition and disposition decisions and to inform capital planning. So the nature of their approach may vary depending on the property type, of course. Like senior housing is going to put really a huge emphasis on occupant safety, whereas logistics is going to be really thinking about community resilience and access to and from the building. The most resilient industrial site may be great, but if trucks can't get in and out during a flood, that's an issue, right? And then, of course, hospitality. I mean, they've been doing these types of assessments for years, especially high end resort properties, given if you go on vacation, you want to be at the beach, right? So they've been thinking about this for a long time. How do we consider this investment? How long do we want to stay in this location? Might we want to sell to someone who maybe is less sophisticated, who won't be doing their due diligence? How do we want to distribute our risk across our portfolio? So, I think another really interesting trend we're seeing right now is the scenarios where a buyer, a seller, and even lenders now will approach a transaction with their own climate risk report. And often this is, just that stage one PRA that we talked about. And then it becomes like a battle of the desktop climate models, like who's right, right? And they do vary because the risk ratings vary from each provider. And sometimes they even do provide damage estimates, but the way those damages are calculated varies and what data went into that. So the PRA becomes a common point of reference to really incorporate all that information with on site assessment by an engineer architect to really understand what's going on. So I think it's early in the stage two of adoption across the industry. I think stage one is ubiquitous really already, but to see people really take it into the field and look at actual damage estimates and resilience investments is going to be something I think we see a lot more of in the years to come.
I totally agree. I think one of the things that really embedding this in the standard processes for real estate and taking it to the building level, like every building is unique. Even if you have two buildings in the same city, same property type, maybe same owner, even same developer, that may be different, right? There may be different risks. There may be different places where, critical systems are located, all the things that could impact the actual resilience of the specific building. And I think that's where, the credibility of sustainability leaders that are out there trying to interpret this climate data and make recommendations are cautious in saying this really has to be a case by case basis if you're going to get to the point where you're going to recommend that you're going to spend money or that you're going to change or influence an investment decision. And I found that over the years, there's been more questions. I think at first it was like, did you do a climate risk assessment? Check a box, everyone feels good. And now there's been more digging in from the investment community. Explain how that information changed your decision making, explain what you did differently because of having that information. And for a while it was a little bit hard to make that case, for just a basic transaction. And now I feel like you have those steps that allow you to take it to the next level.
Yeah, and I think it's really been exciting to see the sustainability leaders connecting with the risk management leaders and those responsible for the insurance coverages, because the more collaboration that can occur across those groups, the easier it is to prove out that ROI on the investment or the decision making.
So I know that the PRA really mirrors and was informed by what a lot of real estate companies were already doing to implement the climate risk assessment process within their investment process. So, what's different now that this standard exists?
Well, I think as I said, it really does provide that common language for the providers of the assessments and those using the assessments to make decisions. So just like when you issue a scope of work for a phase one ESA or a property condition assessment, most owners will have a scope of work that's standard that their consultants agree to abide by. We'd love to see the ASTM PRA standard be referenced in those scopes of work, even if you're just doing the stage one screenings. And I have heard from a couple of the climate modeling companies that they have been reviewing their what they deliver against the standard and making sure that they're meeting those transparency requirements and so on. So just referencing the standard itself in your scope of work would really help move the industry forward in terms of consistency and a common language.
And I think that's important because I think some listeners might be saying, well, I already do this. That sounds like what our process already does. But there was a long scientific process that happened with the ASTM standard and making sure that, all of those little pieces are covered and that you're meeting that level of rigor, I think really is important so that you're not inadvertently missing something in the process and that all the players are all kind of working under the same assumptions, especially when you're dealing with third party providers as well as internal stakeholders. The sustainability and the climate risk leadership really is just one piece of it. It's really the entire transaction and real estate leadership team that comes into making a decision. And the other piece that you brought up a couple times that I think is really important, and I always try and bring up, is the engineering community. I found that, again, like seen as, oh, well, we already do a PCA was something that I used to kind of get as a response. And I say, okay, great. Well, so you already have somebody going out to the site. So can they just check these things as well? Hearing you say that, the engineering firms are really stepping up, training their assessors to go out and look at this alongside the typical PCA process, I think is crucial because it's tight timelines a lot of times if this is a transaction, and the ability to really influence the investment decision, whether that be getting a capital improvement project into the underwriting or potentially saying we're paying too much for this building because of risk. And again, you want to be really sure before you go out and say something like that. So knowing that you have the right team on the ground doing that work. And again, bringing it back to there's a standard, there's a process that everybody knows how to follow. So, well, anything about that, the engineering community, but also kind of this timing of getting these projects identified and getting them into the budgets.
Well, I think really the key is integrating these assessments into the standard due diligence risk management program so that you have, before you even are involved with a specific project, you kind of understand what triggers additional assessment. So, for instance, I think a lot of folks are doing a stage one PRA on their whole portfolio and then with each new acquisition, but then only doing stage twos when certain thresholds are exceeded. And those thresholds could be related to the property value. Some deals might be too small. It's not even worth your time. Others, it really matters. You might have set risk levels that you're concerned about. You might have perils that you're particularly concerned about. And integrating that with your insurance strategy, I think, can be really powerful. And then you have an understanding of when those stage one things are triggered. When do you incorporate the stage two piece into your PCA process or your overall due diligence process? And then if those damage estimates exceed another threshold, then okay, we really need to talk about stage three and what the resilience measures might cost. But I think it's important to state that the resilience measures, first of all, they might already be there. Like we've talked about, if you're building to a really good code in a state that has strong code, if it's a newer building, if the developer proactively included resilience measures, there's a lot of buildings that look really bad on the stage one report that aren't actually in a bad situation. So that's the first thing I would say is it might confirm there's not a problem. So that's good news. Secondly, it might not be that additional dollars just for resilience need to be spent. It could be that maybe the PCA identifies a new roof is needed, then you're just going to spend those roof replacement dollars more wisely, right? So it helps inform the spending so that you're not wasting money. So I hope to try and change some minds out there of like, oh, it's all going to be just extra resilience investment. It's really just about how are you maintaining those buildings and are you making good decisions? And then back to the engineering community piece, I would just say this is another silo that I think develops within ownership groups that you have the acquisitions team doing the due diligence, and then you have the ops or capital planning team that has to take over and go from there. And resilience really is systems. So in the PRA, we are asking questions about prior hazard events that might have occurred, insurance claims that might have occurred, emergency preparedness plans that might be in place. But it can't just end at like acquisition in a folder done. It needs to be an ongoing, especially with some of the perils, it requires a lot of ongoing maintenance and continuing education with the on site staff.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's so important to make sure that whatever is accomplished here kind of follows through to the ongoing development of the project. To that point of like, what are the typical types of projects that you're seeing kind of rise up through this process? So, minor kind of repair and maintenance type projects versus like major capital. What have you seen so far kind of being the most common and or the most rare?
It's really cool when we can collaborate with the insurance strategy. So, some of the REITs out there are having their insurance brokers actually send people out at the same time. And then, I don't know if you all have seen, I'm sure you've seen, ULI just published a great resource called the CRE Guide to Natural Hazards and Property Insurance Underwriting. So, we're seeing a lot of folks incorporate their PRAs and PCAs with COPE data collection in collaboration with the insurance brokers. So COPE is construction, occupancy, protection, and exposure. And the more precise that information is, the more able the insurer is to accurately price the risk. So when you ask, kind of what measures are most common, I think it really depends on what kind of property are we talking about, what's their insurance strategy, and what kind of things could we do to help them. But, some examples would be like installing smart water management systems can really help be more efficient, but also help the property be more resilient in drought areas, for instance. Of course, weather resistant windows and roofing are really important in certain parts of the country. Elevating critical equipment when there's flood risk can be really important. But ideally, those things all align to give you more accurate insurance pricing as well.
Yeah, I think insurance is definitely one of the key players in this space and one of the key ways that we're looking at thinking about that calculated payback, right? Because that's an actual expense instead of kind of avoiding the future disaster costs. It's kind of more in the here and now and continuing to work with that community to have a better understanding of the actual property resilience. And going back to something you said before about, a building can look really bad in that phase one. And I think the danger that's out there is all of this climate risk data being taken kind of at face value. Anybody with an address can run a climate risk assessment, but getting in and really understanding the building systems and the roof and everything like that takes time. And I think that's part of not oversimplifying what what is happening in this space and making sure that it really rises to the level of these true building engineering experts, and that we're getting the information into the hands of the folks that need it the most.
Yeah, and I think it's important too for everyone using this information to realize the uncertainty within the modeling. And really, when you're in a due diligence and acquisition mode, you do want as much information as you can get. Just like if you're traveling to a new city or you're flying somewhere tomorrow, you're going to check the weather. So people do want to have a crystal ball and see what the future might hold. But it is important in that underwriting context that I think, conceptual cost ranges, the direction of change can be used, but I think it's important for everyone to realize if you're getting a stage 1 report and it's giving you a projected damage number, that might be based on hazards of this type in zip codes similar to the zip code of the property for buildings of the same year built, right? But it's not the same as someone physically visiting a site and looking at the current condition. So there's levels of uncertainty, and uncertainty can be fine, right? The only uncertainty that worries me is the invisible kind. So as long as we call it out and say there may be some uncertainty about the direction of change, but this is the best choice we can make in this moment, given what we know, and then move forward. I think that's what makes sense.
And I think unpacking the vulnerability and damage assessment to specific to your property. So again, based on the sector, based on lease types, based on how your improvement plan already might include some of these things, it all impacts how the numbers actually work out for your property. And again, I think for REITs and building owners, controlling the narrative in this space is so important, because if you have a building and anybody can run a climate risk assessment on it and see, oh, wow, red lights flashing everywhere, but all of this information, if you're not sharing that, if you're not putting it out there to your stakeholders, then what can they do except assume that this other data is correct? And so really kind of taking it not only from this kind of internal process and the transaction process through to getting that information out there so that everybody is aware of what's been done, I think is a big part of it as well. And making sure that also we as the real estate community are coordinating with the climate risk providers as well to make sure that we can continue to improve those products and get the best data as possible into the hands of the folks that need it.
Yeah. I mean, we've worked on a couple of projects where the family property I'm thinking of in Florida was having a really hard time getting wind insurance. And just a simple PRA showed that some of the roofs on the property had been replaced more recently than what was reported previously. And that changed the whole dynamic with the carrier and made the pricing actually much more affordable. And there's those stories. There's also stories where people actually reduce the risk because owners now are taking a much bigger piece of the risk stack, right? They're having to have higher deductibles or create captives, and they're just becoming much more responsible for actually responding to the hazards as they occur because insurance doesn't have as big of an appetite for it. So people are just more interested in reducing their risks now, and this helps give the information about what would be most meaningful to do at a property.
Okay, and then one last question that I had, just connecting the dots between resilience and energy efficiency. We talk a lot about energy efficiency in the sustainability community, in the real estate sustainability community, and I find that we kind of put these two things in silos, but really when you look at resilience projects, the connection to the building energy systems and the grid are all interrelated. So, just any thoughts on kind of how you see building owners focusing both on decarbonization and adaptation at the same time?
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, there definitely can be conflicts, but then there are also benefits that serve both sides of the equation. And I should also say the ASTM task group, like we have to revise and update this standard every few years. So this is one of the things I think we'd most like to tackle, and we're open to anyone else who wants to join us, by the way. But yeah, some things like a cool roof installation that reduces energy consumption and provides heat resilience, or smart building systems that optimize energy use while monitoring for extreme weather events. There's also like green infrastructure that manages stormwater while reducing urban heat island effects. Like there's so much. Oh, microgrid systems, right? Energy efficiency and power resilience. There's so many synergies that you can look for. And I think the main thing is these groups collaborating and talking to one another and being aware of what they're working on. And I mean, we've already seen this with the property condition assessment and the property resilience assessment groups, the capital planning groups. If you're having to make these investments anyway for the property, with the roof, with the paving, what have you, why not make a climate informed decision? And I think it's really important that we also bring in the sustainability initiatives that are planned for the property. So it really is collaboration among all the teams and not living in silos, which is something I think we tend to do. But the more we can work across and find things that deliver multiple benefits, it's not just about protecting against risks, it's about creating smarter, more efficient, more resilient buildings that will ultimately grow in value over time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing about the property resilience assessment with our listeners. I really am hopeful and excited to see where this goes and how the industry changes over time to really embed this in the investment process and again have that really flow through to disclosure and transparency about climate risk in real estate portfolios.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate all your work on this as well. And love all the thought leadership that you're putting out there. I think your recent study, NAREIT's recent study on sustainability, really shows how seriously REITs are taking physical risk, and just really appreciate all you're doing to lead in this space.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. We just recently published our sustainability report, which highlights what REITs reported in 2024. And we definitely will continue to monitor and see how this subject continues to be adopted across the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And if you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more about what is happening across the REIT industry, you can subscribe to the REIT Report or leave a review wherever you access your podcasts. If you're interested in learning more about REIT sustainability, check out nareit.com/sustainability, where we highlight efforts across the REIT industry to deliver strategic value through sustainability in the built environment.